The entire restaurant went silent. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor of Le Jardin. Brucey Jason, a man worth $40 billion and known for destroying companies before breakfast, had just screamed in the face of a struggling waitress over a splash of sparkling water. Everyone expected her to cry. Everyone expected her to beg. But Louisa Bennet didn't flinch. She leaned in, looked the most powerful man in New York dead in the eye, and whispered 6 words that would change the course of business history. "Shout at me again, and this ends." What Brucey did next didn't just shock the room, it terrified them. This is the story of the waitress who brought a billionaire to his knees. The humidity in New York City that August was oppressive, but inside Le Jardin, the air was kept at a crisp, expensive 68 degrees. It was the kind of cold that kept the champagne chilled and the patrons alert. Louisa Bennet adjusted her black waistcoat, wincing slightly, as the stiff fabric rubbed against a bruise on her hip, a souvenir from bumping into the prep table earlier that evening. At 26, Louisa looked tired, not the kind of tired a good night's sleep fixes, but the kind that settles in your bones after 2 years of working, double shifts to pay off a debt that wasn't even hers. Table 4 needs water. Now, Henry, the floor manager, hissed into her ear. Henry was a small man with a Napoleonic complex and a terrifying fear of the restaurant's owner. "And don't look him in the eye, it's Jason." Louisa's stomach turned. Brucey Jason. Everyone in the service industry knew the name. The CEO of Jason Global. He was 32, ruthlessly handsome, and had a temper that was legendary on Wall Street. Rumor had it he had fired his own brother during Thanksgiving dinner. He wasn't just a VIP, he was the sun around which the city's economy orbited. Louisa grabbed a crystal pitcher of chilled, sparkling water. She took a breath, smoothed her expression into a mask of polite indifference, and approached table 4. Brucey Jason was sitting alone. That was the first bad sign. Usually men like him had an entourage, lawyers, sycophants, models. But Brucey was alone, staring at a tablet screen with an intensity that suggested he was mentally disassembling a competitor. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Louisa's entire college tuition had been before she dropped out. "Good evening, Mr. Jason," Louisa said softly. "Would you care for some—" "Read the room," Brucey snapped without looking up. His voice was a low baritone, sharp as a razor. "Does it look like I want to chat?" Louisa paused. She needed this job. She needed the rent money. She swallowed her pride. "I apologize, sir. I'm just refilling your water." She stepped forward to pour. At that exact moment, Brucey's phone vibrated violently on the table, a harsh, buzzing drill sound against the fine china. Brucey jerked his hand to grab at his elbow, colliding hard with Louisa's wrist. The pitcher tipped. It wasn't a deluge, just a splash. Maybe 2 ounces of ice-cold water landed on the sleeve of his bespoke Italian jacket. Brucey froze. The silence that rippled through Le Jardin was instantaneous. Conversations at nearby tables died. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Henri, watching from the maitre d' station, looked like he was about to faint. Brucey slowly set his phone down. He looked at the wet spot on his sleeve, then slowly raised his eyes to Louisa. His eyes were grey cold, and currently burning with a misplaced rage that had nothing to do with water and everything to do with a failing merger he was trying to salvage. "You," Brucey said, his voice rising, "are an incompetent idiot." "Sir, you bumped my— I don't care what I did," Brucey roared, slamming his hand on the table. The cutlery jumped. "This suit is worth $10,000. Do you have $10,000? Do you have the brain capacity to pour water into a glass? Or is that too complex for a servant like you?" He stood up, towering over her. "Get out of my face. Get out of this restaurant. You're worthless." Louisa stood there. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks. She thought about her empty bank account. She thought about her sick mother in the care home in Queens. She thought about the architecture degree she abandoned. And then something inside her snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock opening. Louisa didn't retreat. She didn't apologize again. She took one step closer to him, invading his personal space. The scent of expensive sandalwood and aggression came off him in waves. She lowered her voice, forcing him to lean in slightly to hear her. "I am working 3 jobs to keep a roof over my head," Louisa said, her voice shaking not with fear but with adrenaline. "I am tired, my feet are bleeding, and I just watched a grown man throw a temper tantrum because he lacks the coordination to answer a phone." Brucey's eyes widened. He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. "Shout at me again," Louisa warned, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "And this ends. I will walk out, and I will make sure every blog in this city knows that the great Brucey Jason cries over spilled water." The standoff lasted 5 seconds. To the onlookers it felt like 5 years. Brucey stared at her, really looked at her. He saw the fraying collar of her uniform, the dark circles under her eyes, and the absolute unyielding fire in them. He was used to people fearing him. He was used to people worshipping him. He had forgotten what it felt like to be challenged. "You're fired!" Henri shrieked, sprinting over, breaking the spell. He grabbed Louisa's arm roughly. "Mr. Jason, I am so sorry. She is gone. Immediately. Get your things, Louisa." Louisa ripped her arm away from Henri. "Don't touch me. I'm leaving." She looked at Brucey one last time, turned on her heel, and walked toward the kitchen. "Wait." The single word stopped Henri in his tracks. It came from Brucey. Brucey brushed the water off his sleeve, his eyes never leaving Louisa's retreating back. He sat back down, picked up his napkin, and placed it on his lap. "She's not fired," Brucey said calmly. Henri blinked, confused. "Sir, I said she's not fired," Brucey repeated, looking at his tablet again. "In fact, send her back. I want to order." The kitchen of Le Jardin was usually a symphony of chaotic noise, but when Louisa walked in, the line, cooks stared at her like she was a ghost. "Did you really just threaten Brucey Jason?" whispered Leo, the sous-chef, a kindly man who often slipped Louisa extra bread rolls for home. "I didn't threaten him," Louisa said, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. I set a boundary." "You set a boundary with a shark, Sherry," Leo sighed. "You're going to get eaten." The double doors swung open. Henri marched in, looking pale and sweaty. Henri pointed a shaking finger at Louisa. "He wants you back at the table." "No," Louisa said, taking off her apron. "I'm done. I can't be treated like that." "Louisa, please." Henri's voice dropped from anger to desperation. "If you don't go back out there, he might pull his investment. He owns 30% of the hospitality group. If he pulls out, we all lose our jobs. Leo me, everyone." Louisa looked at Leo. He looked down at his cutting board, defeated. She looked at the dishwasher, a kid named Matteo, who was saving for college. She cursed under her breath. She couldn't be the reason they all lost their livelihoods. She tied her apron back on. "Fine, but if he says one word about the suit, I pour the soup in his lap." When Louisa returned to table 4, Brucey didn't look up immediately. He finished typing a sentence, set the tablet aside, and folded his hands. "I'll have the beef Wellington," he said. "Rare." "Is that all?" Louisa asked, her voice icy. "Sit down," Brucey said. "Sir, I cannot sit with customers. It's against protocol." "I own the protocol," Brucey said. He kicked out the chair opposite him. "Sit." Louisa hesitated, then sat on the edge of the chair, ready to bolt. "Why are you a waitress?" Brucey asked. It wasn't an insult this time. It was a genuine inquiry. Because I need money. That's how jobs work, Mr. Jasson. Brucey narrowed his eyes. You're articulate. You have a posture that suggests you weren't raised in a tenement, but your shoes are cheap and worn down. You challenged me, which implies you have self-respect. Yet you take abuse from a little man like Henri. Are you psychoanalyzing me or ordering dinner? I need a favor, Brucey said abruptly. Louisa laughed a dry, humorless sound. A favor? You have billions of dollars. Buy a favor. I can't buy this one, Brucey said. He lowered his voice. I am currently in the middle of a hostile takeover of a family-owned architectural firm in Chicago. They are old-fashioned. They value integrity and family values. My reputation is a problem. Because you shout at waitresses. Precisely, Brucey admitted without shame. My publicist tells me I have an empathy deficit. I need to be seen with someone normal, someone grounded, someone who can make me look human at the St. Jude's Gala this weekend. Louisa stared at him. You want me to be your date to fix your image? You must be joking. I despise you. I will pay you, Brucey said. He pulled a checkbook from his inside pocket. He uncapped a fountain pen. How much is your debt, the one you're working 3 jobs for? Louisa went still. How do you know about that? I have resources. Is it student loans, medical bills? It's my mother's care, Louisa whispered, the fight draining out of her. She has early onset dementia. The facility costs $6,000 a month. I'm 3 months behind. Brucey wrote on the check. He tore it out and slid it across the white tablecloth. Louisa looked at the number. $50,000. That covers the arrears and 6 months in advance, Brucey said casually. One weekend, you pretend to like me. You smile. You stop me from shouting at people. Saturday night, that's the deal. Louisa looked at the check. It was freedom. It was safety for her mother. It was everything she needed, handed to her by the man she hated most. I have conditions, Louisa said, picking up the check. Brucey raised an eyebrow. Oh, 1, you don't speak to me like I'm a servant. 2, you wear a different suit. That one has a water stain. For the first time that night, the corner of Brucey Jasson's mouth twitched. It was almost a smile. Deal. Be in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't be late. The next morning, Louisa arrived at the Plaza Hotel, wearing her best jeans and a clean white blouse. She felt woefully underdressed in the opulent lobby, but she held her head high. A woman with a clipboard was waiting for her. Ms. Bennett, I'm Clara, Mr. Jasson's assistant. Follow me. Louisa was whisked into a suite that was larger than her entire apartment building. It was filled with racks of clothes makeup artists and a stylist who looked at Louisa like she was a block of marble waiting to be chiseled. Brucey said, keep it elegant, not flashy, Clara instructed the stylist. She needs to look like she belongs in his world, but hasn't been corrupted by it. For 4 hours, Louisa was poked, prodded, and polished. When she finally looked in the mirror, she gasped. The woman staring back was wearing a midnight blue velvet gown that hugged her frame perfectly. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, cascaded in soft waves. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like a queen. Acceptable, a voice said from the doorway. Brucey was leaning against the doorframe. He was wearing a tuxedo. He looked devastatingly handsome, which annoyed Louisa to no end. You clean up well, Bennett, he said, walking into the room. I feel ridiculous, Louisa muttered, tugging at the diamond bracelet they had put on her wrist. This isn't me. For tonight it is, Brucey said. He walked over to a table where several large blueprints were spread out. He looked frustrated. He ran a hand through his hair. Damn it! Louisa walked over, curious. She looked down at the blueprints. It was a design for a new eco-friendly skyscraper in Hudson Yards. "The structural load is off on the cantilever," Louisa said, automatically, pointing to a section of the drawing. Brucey froze. He looked at her. "Excuse me." Louisa bit her lip. "Sorry, I used to study this. See here." She traced a line on the blue paper. "You have the wind shear calculations for a steel frame, but this section is reinforced concrete. It's going to crack within 5 years if you don't add a dampener here." Brucey stared at the paper. Then he grabbed a calculator. He punched in some numbers. He stopped. He looked at Louisa with a mixture of shock and suspicion. "You're right," he said softly. "The lead architect on this project makes $500,000 a year, and he missed that. You caught it in 10 seconds. I was top of my class at Cornell," Louisa said, her voice quiet. "Before the money ran out. Before Mum got sick." Brucey looked at her with a new expression. It wasn't the arrogance of the night before, and it wasn't the transactional coldness of the deal. It was respect. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You didn't ask. You asked if I could pour water." Brucey was silent for a moment. He rolled up the blueprints. "Tonight just got more interesting. I'm not just bringing a pretty face to the gala. I'm bringing a weapon." "I am not your weapon, Brucey," Louisa said firmly. "I'm your employee for the weekend. Don't confuse the two." "We'll see," Brucey said. He offered her his arm. "Shall we go, Miss Bennet? The wolves are waiting." As they walked out of the hotel and into the waiting limousine, Louisa felt a shift. This wasn't just about money anymore. She was stepping into a world that had rejected her, armed with the secrets of the man who ruled it. But she didn't know that the biggest threat wasn't the business rivals. It was someone waiting at the gala. Someone with a personal vendetta against Brucey and enough knowledge of Louisa's past to destroy them both. The St. Jude's Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Temple of Dendor was bathed in soft violet light, and the air smelled of orchids and old money. When Brucey and Louisa entered, the flashbulbs were blinding. Brucey placed a protective hand on the small of her back. Through the velvet of her gown, his touch felt electric, steadying her trembling. "Just breathe," Brucey whispered, leaning close to her ear. "They smell fear. Don't give them a whiff." They navigated the crowd like a ship breaking through ice. Brucey introduced Louisa simply as Louisa Bennet, offering no explanation for who she was or why she was on his arm. The mystery drove the gossip columnists wild. "Brucey." A booming voice cut through the chatter. A silver-haired man with a kind face and a cane approached them. This was George Henderson, the patriarch of the Chicago architectural firm Brucey was desperate to acquire. Beside him was his wife, Martha. "Mr. Henderson." Brucey said his charm turned up to maximum voltage. "It's an honor. May I introduce Louisa Bennet?" "A pleasure," Henderson said, shaking Louisa's hand warmly. "Are you in finance as well, Miss Bennet?" "Actually," Louisa said, smiling, "I have a background in structural engineering and architecture." Henderson's eyes lit up. Is that so rare to find someone who understands the art of the build in Brucey's circle? "What do you think of the venue?" It was a test. Brucey stiffened. Louisa looked up at the massive sandstone temple, then at the modern glass wall enclosing it. "It's magnificent," she said thoughtfully. "But I've always found the juxtaposition of the Sackler Wings truss system to be a bit aggressive against the organic lines of the sandstone. It creates a tension between the ancient and the modern. Just like your firm and Jason Global, I suppose. One carries history, the other provides the modern framework to let it survive." Brucey stared at her. It was the perfect answer. It was diplomatic, intelligent, and flattered both men. Brilliant. Henderson chuckled. Brucey, she's a keeper. You might actually have a soul if you associate with minds like this. The deal was practically sealed in that moment. Brucey looked at Louisa with a mixture of relief and something warmer admiration. But the warmth didn't last. Well, well, well. The voice was like shattered glass dipped in honey. Isabella Van Doren glided toward them. She was the CEO of Van Doren Steel, Brucey's biggest rival, and unfortunately his ex-fiancée. She wore red, signaling war. "Hello, Isabella," Brucey said, his voice dropping 10 degrees. Isabella ignored him. She circled Louisa like a shark. "And who is this I don't believe we've met? I know everyone who is anyone in New York." "Louisa Bennett," Louisa said, holding her ground. "Bennett." Isabella tapped a manicured finger against her chin. "I don't know any Bennetts in the Hamptons, or in Aspen." "Where did you say you winter, darling?" "I winter in Queens," Louisa said calmly. "It's lovely this time of year." Brucey stepped forward. "Isabella, don't." "Oh, stop it, Brucey," Isabella snapped. She pulled out her phone. "You know technology is wonderful. Facial recognition is so accessible these days." She swiped on her screen. "Here we are. Louisa Bennett. Address 42B Mulberry Lane, Queens. Occupation: waitress at Le Jardin." The small circle of people around them went silent. Henderson looked confused. Isabella laughed, a cruel ringing sound. "A waitress? Brucey, really, did you pick her up with the appetizers?" "How much is he paying you for the night, dear? Or is this a pretty woman scenario?" Louisa felt the blood drain from her face. The humiliation was physical, a punch to the gut. She waited for Brucey to speak, to defend her, to say she was brilliant, that she was an architect, that she mattered. But Brucey hesitated. He looked at Henderson, whose face had hardened. He looked at the investors whispering behind their hands. The billionaire panic set in. For a split second, he was ashamed, and Louisa saw it. She didn't cry. She remembered the promise she made to herself. She took a step toward Isabella. "I am a waitress," Louisa said, her voice clear and carrying over the crowd. "And I serve people like you every day. I clean up your messes. I listen to your drunk confessions. I see who you really are when you think the help isn't listening." She turned to Brucey. "I think my shift is over." Louisa walked away. She left the gala, walking out into the humid New York night in a $10,000 dress, hailing a yellow cab, while the paparazzi snapped photos of the runaway Cinderella. The next morning, the headache was pounding behind Brucey's eyes. He had spent the night doing damage control. Henderson hadn't walked away yet, but the trust was fractured. He sat in his office, the skyline of Manhattan sprawling behind him. He needed to apologize to Louisa. He knew he had failed her. He picked up his phone to call her. Suddenly the door burst open. His head of security, a man named Miller, walked in. He looked grim. "Mr. Jason, we have a problem. A big one." "What now?" "The blueprints for the Hudson Yards project. The revised ones. The ones with the structural fixes you made yesterday." "What about them?" "They were leaked to the press this morning, and to the Department of Buildings. Someone tipped them off that the original design was unsafe. The project has been red flagged. Our stock is plummeting." Brucey stood up. "Who leaked it?" Miller placed a tablet on the desk. "We checked the access logs. The file was downloaded from your private server at 2:00 a.m. last night. The access code used belonged to the temporary guest pass issued to Louisa Bennett." Brucey felt the room spin. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Miller asked. "She needs money, Brucey. We checked her bank account. A wire transfer of $200,000 hit her account this morning, from a shell company linked to Isabella Van Doren. The evidence was damning. The access code, the money, The motive. Brucey's heart hardened into a block of ice. He thought of her integrity. He thought of her story about her sick mother. It was all a con. She had played him. She had embarrassed him at the gala to create a distraction, then sold him out to Isabella. "Bring her here," Brucey growled. "Now." 2 hours later, Louisa was escorted into the office. She was wearing her jeans and waitress uniform again. She looked tired, her eyes red from crying, but she held her head high. "I came to return the bracelet," Louisa said, placing the velvet box on his desk. "I don't want anything from you." "Cut the act," Brucey spat. He threw the photos of the bank transfer logs at her. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. "You sold me out. 200 grand. That's what I'm worth to you." Louisa looked at the papers confused. "What is this? I didn't do this." "The files were stolen with your code. The money is in your account," Brucey shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "I trusted you. I let you into my world, and you stole from me." "I didn't steal anything," Louisa screamed back. "I don't know how that money got there. Isabella must have— Isabella is a shark, but she doesn't break the law," Brucey roared. He walked around the desk, looming over her the same terrifying rage he had shown in the restaurant. "You're a liar, you're a thief, and I am going to destroy you. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will sue you for every penny. I will have your mother thrown out of that facility." The room went dead silent. Brucey realized what he had said. He had crossed the line. He had used her vulnerable mother as a weapon. Louisa stared at him. Her expression wasn't fear anymore. It was absolute cold detachment. "You shouted," she whispered. Brucey blinked. "What? I told you," Louisa said, her voice hollow. "I told you at the restaurant. Shout at me again, and this ends." "Louisa, look at the evidence." "The evidence is that you are a small, sad man who assumes everyone is as corrupt as he is," Louisa said. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the check for $50,000, the one he had given her for her mother, and ripped it into pieces. She let the confetti fall onto the expensive Persian rug. "I didn't take your money. I didn't take Isabella's money. Check the time stamps, Brucey." "At 2:00 a.m. I was at the hospital. My mother had a seizure. I was holding her hand while you were looking at spreadsheets." She turned to the door. "Louisa, wait." Brucey stepped forward. "Don't," she said, without turning around. "If you come near me, I'll call the police. We are done." She walked out. The heavy glass door clicked shut. Brucey stood alone in his tower. He looked down at the torn check. He looked at the bank transfer logs. Then his phone rang. It was the hospital. "Mr. Jasson, this is the billing department at Queen's Mercy. We're calling about Miss Bennett. She listed you as an emergency contact. We just wanted to let you know her mother passed away at 2:15 a.m. last night." Brucey dropped the phone. At 2:00 a.m., when the files were being stolen, Louisa was watching her mother die. She couldn't have done it. He had just destroyed an innocent woman on the worst day of her life. 3 weeks had passed since Louisa Bennett walked out of the glass tower, leaving a torn check and a shattered ego in her wake. For the first time in the history of Jasson Global, the CEO's office was dark at 11 a.m. The blinds were drawn, blocking out the panoramic view of the empire Brucey no longer cared about. The stock price had stabilized after the initial leak, but the Hudson Yards project, the crown jewel of his career, was dead in the water. Investors had fled. The Henderson firm had publicly distanced themselves, citing ethical incompatibility. But Brucey wasn't mourning the loss of money. He was haunting his own life. He sat in his leather chair unshaven, wearing the same shirt he had put on 2 days ago. On the massive 80-inch monitor on the wall, a video loop played silently. It was the security footage from the St. Jude's Gala. Again, Brucey croaked. Miller, his head of security, sighed. He had been standing in the corner for 4 hours. "Sir, we've watched it 100 times. Isabella insults her. Louisa walks away. It doesn't change." "It has to change," Brucey muttered, his eyes bloodshot. The timestamp on the server login was 2:00 a.m. Louisa was at the hospital. I verified the death certificate, Miller. She was holding her mother's hand while the woman took her last breath. She didn't steal the files. Someone else used her key. "Maybe she gave the key to an accomplice," Miller suggested gently. "No," Brucey snapped. "You didn't see her eyes. You didn't see the way she looked at me when I accused her. That wasn't the look of a caught thief. That was the look of someone watching the last bit of faith they had in humanity die." Brucey grabbed the remote. "Zoom in, Sector 4, the moment she turns to leave." The video zoomed in, the pixels blurred, then sharpened. On screen, Louisa turned away from Isabella Van Doren. As she did, a figure in a tuxedo stumbled slightly, bumping into her right side, the side where she held her clutch purse. "Stop!" Brucey shouted. The frame froze. "That man," Brucey pointed a trembling finger. "That's not a guest. That's the help." Miller squinted. That looks like the manager from Le Jardin." "Henri." "Why was a restaurant manager at a $10,000 a plate gala?" Brucey whispered. The gears in his mind, rusted by grief, began to spin with terrifying speed. "Go frame by frame. Forward. Click. Henri bumps Louisa. Click. His hand moves. Not to steady himself. Click. His hand slips into the open clasp of her clutch. Click. He retracts his hand. A small white rectangle is palmed in his grip. The keycard. Click. He disappears into the crowd, heading straight toward the exit, where Isabella Van Doren was standing. The silence in the office was deafening. It wasn't a betrayal by Louisa. It was a setup, a calculated surgical assassination of her character, orchestrated by Isabella and executed by the petty tyrant, Henry. And Brucey had fallen for it. He had taken the bait, and in doing so, he had destroyed the one person who had actually tried to save him. Brucey stood up. The chair fell backward with a crash. "Sir?" Miller asked, alarmed by the sudden cold fury radiating from his boss. Brucey walked to the closet and pulled out a fresh suit jacket. He didn't bother with a tie. "Get the car, Miller, and call the legal department. Tell them to draft a lawsuit against Van Doren Steel for corporate espionage. I want Isabella buried in so much litigation, she won't be able to buy a pack of gum without a lawyer present." "And where are we going?" Brucey checked his watch. "Lunch service is starting at Le Jardin. I have a reservation." The atmosphere at Le Jardin was polite and hushed, the clinking of silver against china, the only real noise. That changed the moment the double doors were kicked open. Brucey Jasson didn't walk in. He invaded. He marched past the hostess stand, ignoring her startled cry. He walked straight into the main dining room. The patrons, bankers, socialites, tourists froze. They recognized him instantly. They also recognized the look on his face. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. Henri was standing near the kitchen berating a busboy. He looked up his face, transforming from arrogance to terror in a split second. "Mr. Jasson," Henri squeaked, his hands fluttering. We weren't expecting you. I can have a table ready in..." Brucey didn't stop until he was nose to nose with the small man. The restaurant went deadly silent. "You stole it," Brucey said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Excuse me." The key card, Brucey clarified. At the gala, you bumped into her. You picked her pocket. You gave the card to Isabella, and she wired you $200,000 to frame Louisa Bennett. Henry's face went white. That's absurd. You have no proof. Brucey pulled out his phone and held it up. The freeze frame of Henry's hand in Louisa's purse was displayed in high definition. I have the video. Brucey lied smoothly. He only had the grainier security footage, but Henry didn't know that. I have the forensic accounting of your bank records. The FBI is currently seizing Isabella's servers. She's going to turn on you, Henry. She's going to tell them it was all your idea to avoid prison. Henry began to shake. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. Mr. Jason, please. She promised me. She said Louisa was going to get you fired anyway. Where is she? Brucey roared. The control snapped. The whisper was gone. This was the shout of a desperate man. I don't know, Henry cried, backing into a waiter and sending a tray of drinks crashing to the floor. Brucey grabbed Henry by the lapels of his cheap suit and slammed him against the wall. A collective gasp went through the room. Phones were out. This was going viral in seconds. Brucey didn't care. You took her job. You ruined her reputation. You made her miss the last moments of her mother's life because she was dealing with your lies. Brucey snarled, his face inches from Henry's. You have 5 seconds to tell me where she went, or I will make it my personal mission to ensure you never work, never rent an apartment, and never open a bank account in this country again. I will hunt you, Henry. 4. Ohio, Henry screamed, squeezing his eyes shut. She went to Ohio. Her aunt has a farm near Columbus. Please don't kill me. Brucey released him. Henry slid down the wall, weeping into his hands. Brucey turned to the room. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the stunned diners. Enjoy your lunch, he said. It's on the house. The private jet landed in Columbus 3 hours later. The transition from the concrete canyons of New York to the flat, grey expanse of the Midwest felt like entering a different planet. Brucey rented a Ford sedan. He drove for an hour following the GPS coordinates his team had scraped from Louisa's old personnel files. The paved roads turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to dirt. It was raining when he found the house. It was a small white farmhouse with peeling paint and a sagging front porch. A rusting tractor sat in the yard. It was a place of poverty, but also of quiet dignity. Brucey parked the car. He sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. He was terrified. He was Brucey Jason, the man who moved markets, and he was terrified of a 26-year-old structural engineer. He stepped out into the rain. His Italian loafers sank into the mud. He didn't care. He walked up the driveway. Louisa was sitting on the porch swing. She was wrapped in a thick, hand-knitted blanket. She was staring out at the cornfields, watching the rain fall. She looked different. The fire that had burned in her eyes at the restaurant was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion. She heard his footsteps on the wooden stairs. She didn't look up. "You're trespassing," she said softly. Her voice was flat. "I know," Brucey said. He stopped on the second step. He felt unworthy of the porch. "Did you come to yell at me some more?" Louisa asked, still looking at the corn. "Did you bring the police? Or did you just come to tell me how worthless I am one last time?" "I came to tell you that Henri is in police custody," Brucey said. Louisa paused. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I saw the tape." Brucey continued, the rain dripping off his hair and running down his face. "I saw him steal the card. I know Isabella paid him. I know you didn't do it." Louisa let out a short, bitter laugh. "Congratulations, Brucey. You figured it out. You're a genius." "I'm sorry," Brucey said. The words felt inadequate, tiny, against the magnitude of her loss. "I am so incredibly sorry." "Sorry." Louisa stood up. The blanket fell to the floor. "You think sorry fixes this?" My mother died alone. Brucey, the nurse, called me at 2:00 a.m. to tell me she was fading. I was on my way. I was 5 minutes away. Her voice broke, cracking with the weight of the grief she had been carrying. And then my phone rang. It wasn't the hospital. It was your security team, screaming at me, calling me a thief, threatening to arrest me. I pulled over because I was shaking so hard I couldn't drive. I spent 20 minutes on the side of the road trying to explain I didn't do it. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the rain blowing onto the porch. I got to the hospital at 2:30. She was gone. She died while I was crying on the phone with your goons. Because of your ego. Because you couldn't believe for 1 second that I was actually a decent person. Brucey felt his knees give out. The reality of it hit him like a physical blow. He dropped to the muddy ground at the base of the stairs. He didn't care about the suit. He didn't care about dignity. "I can't fix it," Brucey choked out, his head bowed. "I would give every dollar I have to buy you back those 20 minutes, but I can't." He looked up at her rain, and tears blurring his vision. "I am a broken man, Louisa. I have nothing but money, and it's useless. I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that you were right. About everything. About the building. About me. I am the small man. You are the giant." Louisa looked down at him. She saw the billionaire kneeling in the Ohio mud, stripped of his arrogance, shivering in the cold. She saw the genuine agony in his face. The anger didn't vanish, but the hate did. Hate required energy, and she was too tired for hate. She sighed a long, shuddering breath. She reached into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a napkin from a diner. She walked down the stairs. She stood in front of him. "Get up, Brucey," she said. Brucey stood slowly wiping the mud from his knees. "Louisa, Shut up," she said, but there was no venom in it. She held out the napkin. "On the drive here, before I knew you were coming. I was thinking about the spire. I couldn't help it. It's a flaw in my brain. I fix things." Brucey took the napkin. His hands were shaking. On the flimsy paper sketched in blue ballpoint pen was a diagram. It was a redesign of the cantilever system, a spiraling truss structure that mimicked the organic curve of a spine. "The wind shear," Louisa explained quietly. "If you spiral the support beams like a helix, you don't need the heavy concrete. It distributes the load naturally. It saves the project. It saves your legacy." Brucey stared at the drawing. It was brilliant. It was elegant. It was worth millions of dollars, and she was handing it to him in the rain after everything he had done to her. "Why?" Brucey whispered. "Why would you help me?" Louisa looked at the grey sky. "Because my mother loved beautiful things, and she would have hated to see something with so much potential fall apart just because the people building it were broken." She looked back at Brucey. "You broke me, Brucey. I'm not going to lie and say we're okay. We aren't. But the building doesn't have to be broken." Brucey folded the napkin carefully and placed it in his pocket, treating it like a holy relic. "I'm not building it without you," he said firmly. "I'm not coming back to New York." Louisa shook her head. "I'm done with that life." "Then I'll move the headquarters to Ohio," Brucey said instantly. "I'll build it from a cornfield if I have to. I don't care about the location. I care about the architect, and that's you." Louisa looked at him. For the first time in weeks, a small, faint spark returned to her eyes. You'd move a Fortune 500 company to a farm. Watch me." Louisa looked at the man who had once screamed over spilled water, now ready to burn down his world for a second chance. "You're crazy," she whispered. "No," Brucey said. "I'm just finally listening." 5 years later. The New York City skyline had changed, and piercing the clouds above Hudson Yards was a new king of the concrete jungle, the Jason Bennett Spire. It was a marvel of modern engineering, a twisting tower of glass and steel that seemed to defy gravity. Unlike the other cold, boxy skyscrapers, this one curved, organically designed to embrace the wind rather than fight it. It was the building that saved Brucey Jason's career. But everyone on Wall Street knew that Brucey didn't design it. On the top floor in a corner office that looked down on the entire city, Louisa Bennett sat behind a desk made of reclaimed oak. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She was wearing a tailored cream suit that cost more than the house she grew up in. "Madam Chairwoman," Louisa looked up. It was her assistant, a bright young man named David. "Yes. The board is waiting, and Mr. Jason is here." "Send him in." Louisa smiled. Brucey walked in. He looked different than the man who had screamed in Le Jardin 5 years ago. His hair had a touch of grey at the temples, and the perpetual frown line between his brows was gone. He looked lighter. "You're late," Louisa said, checking her watch. "I was getting coffee," Brucey said. He walked over and placed a paper cup on her desk, and I waited in line, like a normal person. Louisa took a sip. "Hazelnut oat milk latte." "You remembered." "I remember everything," Brucey said softly. He sat in one of the guest chairs opposite her desk. The dynamic had shifted completely. After the scandal with Isabella and Henri, Brucey had kept his word. He didn't just apologize. He dismantled his life. He brought Louisa onto the Hudson Yards project as a consultant. When the world saw her genius, he didn't hide it. He promoted her. Then he funded her education to finish her degree. But the biggest twist came 2 years ago, when the Henderson firm, the one Brucey had failed to acquire, went up for sale again. Brucey didn't buy it. He gave Louisa the capital to buy it. Now Louisa Bennett wasn't just Brucey's partner. She was the CEO of Bennett and Henderson Architecture. Jason Global was her client. Technically, she was his boss on this project. "Are you ready for the press conference?" Brucey asked. "I hate press conferences," Louisa admitted, standing up and walking to the window. "I still feel like the girl carrying the tray. I'm afraid someone is going to shout at me for spilling the water." Brucey stood up and joined her at the window. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel his warmth. "No one shouts at you anymore, Louisa. They listen. You changed the industry. You made empathy a metric for construction." "We changed it," Louisa corrected him. She looked down at the street below. "Do you remember that night at the restaurant?" "Every day," Brucey said. "It was the worst moment of my life, and the best, because it woke me up." "I have a surprise for you," Louisa said. "We have to make a stop before the press conference." 30 minutes later, the town car pulled up in front of a familiar building, Le Jardin. The restaurant was under new management now, but the decor was largely the same. Brucey looked nervous. "Why are we here?" "Come inside." They walked in. The lunch rush was beginning, the clatter of silverware, the murmur of conversations. It was the soundtrack of Louisa's past. Louisa led Brucey to table 4, the table where they had met. Sitting there was a young woman, maybe 20 years old. She was crying softly into a napkin. A manager, not Henry, but a man who looked just as stressed, was berating her near the kitchen doors. "You dropped the tray. That's $50 out of your tips," the manager barked. Brucey stiffened. His old instincts flared not to join the manager, but to destroy him. He took a step forward, his face darkening. Louisa put a hand on his chest. "Wait. Watch." Brucey watched. He expected the girl to crumble. He expected her to run away. Instead, the young waitress wiped her eyes. She stood up, straighter. She looked the manager in the eye. "I will pay for the glasses," the girl said, her voice shaking but firm. "But you will not speak to me like that. I am a human being. Shout at me again and I walk." The manager was stunned into silence. Brucey looked at Louisa, wide-eyed. "Did you—" "I started a scholarship program," Louisa whispered, "for service workers who want to go to college, but part of the program is mentorship. We teach them negotiation. We teach them self-worth. That girl, she's a pre-law student. She's one of mine." Brucey looked back at the girl who was now calmly resetting the table while the manager scurried away defeated. "You created an army," Brucey said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "An army of people who won't take what I used to dish out." "I told you," Louisa said, taking his hand. "Shout at us and it ends. The era of the bully is over, Brucey." Brucey squeezed her hand. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He had been carrying it for 6 months, waiting for the right moment. "Well," Brucey said, getting down on one knee, right there in the middle of Le Jardin, on the same marble floor where he had once humiliated her. "Since I can't shout anymore, maybe I should whisper." The restaurant went silent. The young waitress gasped. Brucey looked up at Louisa. "Louisa Bennett, you fixed my building. You fixed my company. You fixed my soul. I don't want to be your boss. I don't want to be your client. I just want to be the man who holds your purse while you run the world. Will you marry me?" Louisa looked around the room. She saw the young waitress smiling. She saw the ghost of her past self standing in the corner, tired and bruised. And she saw the man in front of her who had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true power isn't about how loud you can scream, but how humble you can be. "Get up, Brucey," Louisa said, feigning sternness. Brucey's face fell slightly. "Is that a no?" Louisa grabbed his lapels and pulled him up, kissing him hard enough to knock the breath out of him. "That," she whispered against his lips, "is a yes, but you're still not allowed to order for me." "Deal," Brucey breathed, as the restaurant erupted in applause. Brucey Jasson, the billionaire who once thought he owned the world, realized he was finally truly rich. And that is how a single moment of courage changed everything. Louisa proved that your worth isn't defined by your uniform, your bank account, or the people who try to make you feel small. She showed us that standing your ground, even when your voice is shaking, can be the start of a whole new life. Brucey learned that true strength isn't about dominance. It's about the ability to change, to apologize, and to grow. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many times have we let someone step on us because we were afraid of the consequences? And what would happen if just once we looked them in the eye and said, "This ends"? If Louisa's story moved you, or if you've ever had to stand up to a bully in your own life, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these stories with more people who need to hear them. And I want to hear from you in the comments below. What is the one thing you wish you could say to your boss but haven't yet? Let it out in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story that hits hard and hits home. We post new real-life dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, your voice is your power. Use it.